mean much of the me, or the soul, really. But,
Soul.
yeah. And it's important that the me's in tune and it doesn't go flat, so it's good if they don't.
Good morning and welcome to Cedar Lane Unitarian Universalist Church, a liberal religious community where love works. Please know that whoever you are, wherever you're from, whoever you love, wherever you are on life's journey, whatever your gender identity, your beliefs, or your immigration status, you are welcome here. We appreciate you sharing the gift of your presence and connection by choosing to worship with us today. And a very special welcome to those joining our service online, whether in the moment or catching up later. We are so glad to have you with us.
Good morning, Christin.
Good morning, Reverend Abby.
Good morning. Good morning. All right. This is 11 o'clock. The 9 o'clock was just really energetic, weren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, all right. If you're new to Cedar Lane, we have a small gift for you. Please raise your hand if you're comfortable doing so we may recognize and welcome you to our worship this morning, and also so our ushers can find you. Do we have guests this morning? Well, I'm seeing some new faces. All right, welcome. Let's give our guests a warm Cedar Lane welcome. Included with your gift is a beautiful brochure that introduces you to Cedar Lane. If you feel comfortable doing so, please fill out the last page and return the form with the offering when we take up the offering later in the service. Thank you for your gift of presence and joining us for worship today. All are invited to stay after the service for some coffee, tea, some matzah, left over from yesterday's Freedom Seder, and other things, assortment that you will find. I hope you will join us to both commune over coffee and also connect with the community.
Thank you. You may have noticed that we were blessed with a procession of some sacred objects this morning as our youth sang. Since it is Earth Day service, this is an Earth Day themed service. Earth Day was on the 22nd, but we're celebrating it all year. I wanted to bring this recycling bin, and also I meant to bring a compost bin that I may get at some point during the service, just to bring them onto the chancel and ritualize them, lift them up as sacred objects that we celebrate our Cedar Lane Green Sanctuary Covenant, our 7th grade RE class, which focuses on social justice. They have been wonderful creating these posters. They've been especially focused on environmental justice recently, including ways we can better embrace that Cedar Lane Green Sanctuary Covenant. Copies of the covenant are displayed all over the church, but better yet, I invite you to connect with one of our youth and find out what is important to them. Our youth are often our sages. Our 7th grade class also voted in an act of intergenerational partnership with the Environmental Justice Ministries team to share the plate today with an organization called Our Children's Trust. Here to speak about the impact of this Share the Plate is Naeem Alam, a senior at the University of Maryland in electrical engineering. Welcome, Naeem. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Oh, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak with you all today. How are you all doing? All right, great. So, as Christin mentioned, my name is Naeem. I'm an electrical engineering major from the University of Maryland and a member of the Sunrise Movement. The reason that I chose to study electrical engineering is because it relates to renewable energy, and that is something that we need a lot of in our future. But what I'm here to talk about today is the Juliana case, which you all may have heard of, and Our Children's Trust. Essentially, the premise behind the Juliana case is that 21 youth plaintiffs, many of them below the age of 18, have brought a case against the United States federal government over climate change. And this is different than some other cases that have risen in the past, because this isn't accusing the US government for failing to take action on climate change. This is actually a case that is calling out the United States government for actually actively aiding climate change and worsening it in the form of subsidies for fossil fuel companies such as Exxon and Chevron. And this is actually true. The US gives billions of dollars every year to these companies, and these young plaintiffs, through Our Children's Trust, a 501c3 that is legally representing them in this case, have brought this case to demand that the United States government stop these subsidies and take action. And so essentially, there have been a lot of legal arguments that the youth plaintiffs have brought up through Our Children's Trust, including violations of due process and violations of an idea of public trust. But one of the most important arguments that they've brought up is that our society as a whole cannot function if the environment is not protected and if climate change continues to have disastrous effects upon our society. And this argument in particular is very important because it was recently upheld in a federal district court, which is a huge victory for this movement to get the United States to take action on climate change. So what's going to be happening next is on June 4th, the plaintiffs are going to have a hearing to determine when they're going to go to a circuit court, which is the next court that their case will be heard at. Until then, they'll need a lot of support from all of us in the forms of donations so that they can pay for their legal fees and fly in all of the lawyers to help the case happen. So I'm going to be giving them all the support I can. I hope that you all will be willing to support them as well, because at the end of the day, we have to make climate change a case that we can constitutionally require the United States government to take action on, and that's what this case is all about. Thank you all for having me here to speak a little bit about the significance of this case, and I hope that you all feel a little moved to think of the members of Our Children's Trust.
Thank you.
Thank you, Naeem, for sharing more information about this inspiring and courageous work that's happening through Our Children's Trust. And thank you to all of you in advance for your very generous support of this important work. And I also would like to thank the 7th grade class for picking our Children's Trust as the recipient for today's Share the Plate, and for all the good work you have been doing, immersing yourself in environmental justice, working also with our environmental justice ministry team. And finally, I'd like to draw your attention to the announcements page that you may have picked up when you walked in. And there are many things happening on campus today and in the upcoming weeks. And I hope you'll be able to join us for some or all of these. We'd just like to highlight a few things. If you have a pastoral need or concern today, Betsy Binks, our pastoral visitor, will be available during and after the service by the Joys and Sorrows table when she's not ushering in between. And we will witness that sacred dance that she will be doing as well. And commend you, Betsy, for playing a double role today. And also, starting this Sunday, one of our youth who is going to be an Eagle Scout for his Eagle Scout project is collecting books. His name is Oscar Ferguson Osborne, and the books will go to the Maryland Correctional Libraries, where they will help inmates build careers and livelihoods after they get out and give them an opportunity to socialize with the incarcerated. So there will be a donation box. Actually, it's outside in the vestibule this Sunday and the next couple of Sundays. You're welcome to drop off books, fiction and nonfiction, as well as more recent periodicals and magazines. So none of those Life magazines from the 1950s, please. So thank you for supporting our youth in this important project that he has taken up. Kristen?
Don't forget, today is our celebration of Holi. This afternoon from 3 to 5, we will celebrate Holi with a lively program, delicious Indian treats, and of course, all the beautiful colors.
Outside.
Yes. If you think of it, you might want to bring some swim goggles to protect your eyes. I have some.
As well as some old clothes.
Yes, old clothes. Be ready to party.
And get messy.
Yes, because this is my first time, so I expect to be especially colorful by the end of the afternoon.
Well, be prepared to be initiated.
Yes. I'm
Look
ready.
at this as your preamble to your ordination.
Oh.
You're going to be ordained today.
Yes.
In the courtyard.
Yes.
There will be an anointing.
Oh, I'm ready. I'm so ready.
And the community will participate.
Thank you. Now, in keeping with the spirit of our community, I invite you to turn to your neighbor and greet them this morning. The air, the fire, the water, return, 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 return. The earth, the air, the fire, the water, return, 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 return. Ay, 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 oh, ay, oh, ay, oh, ay. Ay, 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 oh, ay, oh, ay, oh, ay, oh. Who am I in a school of 1,000 students? Inquired the youth.
Who are you in a galaxy of 100 billion stars? Responded the sage.
Who am I in a world of 6,000 million people? Inquired the youth.
Who are you in a cosmos of 100 billion galaxies?
Who am I whose ancestors sailed away from their homeland? Asked the youth.
Who are you whose ancestors crawled out of the sea? Replied the sage.
Who am I whose ancestors learned to till the soil? Asked the youth.
Who are you whose ancestors learned to breathe the air?
Who am I in a body made of mortal flesh? Implored the youth.
Who are you as flesh made of immortal stardust? Offered the sage.
Who am I with a mind aching for answers? Asked the youth.
Who are you as universe with questions and answers hidden within you?
Come, let us worship together.
I invite you to rise in body or spirit as our 7th grade class and the 7th grade class teachers come forward to light the chalice, this symbol of our faith and gathered community. And as this amazing group of dedicated youth and adults come forward, let us read the words printed in your order of celebration and also on the screen. Fire and water, ancient opposites, sun, sea, and soil, cradle of life, dancing flame and dancing river, transform us as we kindle our light. Please remain risen as we sing together hymn number 21, For the Beauty of the Earth. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Sandy Dawsey, and I've been a member of Cedar Lane for about 30 years. I recognized myself as a UU a few years before that, when I first learned that such a faith existed, and I realized that its principles were my principles, and its focus on social activism was also a focus of mine. I've always believed instinctively and without question in the inherent worth and dignity of every person, the fundamental equality of all souls, and my desire to live actively to improve the world around me. My wife and I came to Cedar Lane because it was the closest UU church. It had a great RE program, and it had a choir that I could sing in. But until recently, I missed having an inspirational minister, so I pretty much confined my participation to the music program. But this has dramatically changed since the arrival of Reverend Abi, who's one of the most inspirational and visionary ministers I have ever known. So I've now become increasingly more committed and engaged. Now, Reverend Abi suggested that I talk to you this morning about what I think we do well here at Cedar Lane. But instead, I want to discuss something that I think we could improve on, which is openly and non-judgmentally discussing money and our annual giving to support this church. For the last 20 years of his life, my father belonged to a Baptist megachurch in rural Florida. This church meant a lot to him, and it supported him greatly when he was living alone and going through cancer surgery and health problems. When I was visiting, I accompanied him to services and was impressed by the excellent choir, the amazing building, and the huge congregation. I also noticed that the charismatic minister, who dressed in beautiful suits and drove a large late-model Cadillac, discussed finances with the congregation every week, exhorting them to give more and ever more to support the church. In the last years of his life, I did my father's taxes for him, and I saw that he did give more and more, until he was giving 50% of his $5,000 annual income to the church. I found this shocking, and I could never go to that church again without thinking and resenting that they were taking advantage of him and many other elderly people with their eternal requests that everyone give more. When my wife and I moved to Kensington and started coming to Cedar Lane, we had 3 small children, and we all lived on my postdoctoral fellow's salary at NIH. So we couldn't give a lot to our new church. And, at least partly because of my earlier experience with my father and his church, I was very aware of and reacted negatively to blanket appeals from the church that everyone needed to increase their pledge. There were 2 things that particularly bothered me. These appeals never seemed to acknowledge that different individuals have different financial circumstances, and they never said exactly why they needed the extra money. For many years, I sang in the choir next to Jay Schneider, who was often on the board, and we sometimes discussed why Cedar Lane often had an annual budget shortfall. Were we overstaffed? Or were we paying our ministers and staff too much? Or were we collectively just not giving enough to support the reasonable expenses of the church that we all came here to be part of? A couple of months ago, I sat in on a board meeting which was devoted to the budget, and I was happy to learn that they were evaluating just these questions, including comparing the actual staffing and average pledges of the 7 UU churches of comparable size in the DC metro area, and, since actual salaries and benefits are confidential, comparing our staff's compensation with the UUA guidelines. Over the past few weeks, they have shared some of these evaluations in their board news and views postings, and they will share the rest soon, including today at the board's up-close and personal meeting in the library right after this service. Looking at these analyses, I am convinced of several things. First, we are not overstaffed. Our staffing of ministers, the RE program, the music program, and our building maintenance needs are exactly comparable to that of the other UU churches of similar size in the DC area. Second, we are not overpaying our staff. None of our staff is paid more than the UUA guidelines, and some are paid less. And if we furlough our staff for several weeks, as we are currently planning to do this coming fiscal year, all of our staff will be paid less than the UUA guidelines. Third, our average annual pledge is fifth out of the 7 comparable congregations in our area, about $400 per year less than the top 3. That's $33 per month. And if every household could pledge $33 per month more than they do now, we wouldn't have a budget deficit. I think this is very useful information to have when we think about making our pledges. It makes me think that our problem is not overstaffing or paying too much to our staff, but rather that, collectively, we're not pledging enough to pay the reasonable expenses of our exceptional religious community. I personally think that we currently have an amazing staff, and it really bothers me to learn that we are paying some of them less than the UUA's guidelines. And then we are also furloughing them without pay for several weeks. We are all concerned that public school teachers are underpaid, and we rail against the government and even start support groups when federal workers and contractors are furloughed. We shouldn't be doing these very same things to our staff and underpaying and furloughing these very special people. Again, I think no one should even consider increasing their pledge beyond what they think is reasonable in their circumstances. But I think that people who have not pledged should do so, and those of us who can give more should think very hard about increasing our support for Cedar Lane for this coming year and for future fiscal years. We need to pay our bills, and we need to pay our staff fairly. Lastly, I would like to say that I think it's important for us as a congregation to learn to talk about money more openly with less anxiety. Every organization as large as ours needs money. It's like our bodies need food. If we can learn to talk about it more openly and non-judgmentally, and where the balance should be and why, this topic should lose some of its taboo, and this should make us a healthier and happier community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sandy. We gather here this morning to honor the newest members to join this congregation over its now 67 years of history. We gather as an expression of our mutual quest toward personal and religious fulfillment. But we also gather together to recommit to what it means to be a member of this congregation. So thank you, Sandy, for the reminder of that financial piece of our commitment. We gather secure in the knowledge that the truths we seek are not constrained by doctrine or creed. We recognize that each is here for reasons known only to the individual heart, and yet we gather in common fellowship to effect and sustain an atmosphere of mutual support. We do not ask that you believe unquestioning that which is espoused by another's convictions. We only ask that you follow faithfully that which your conscience dictates, mindful that in your searching you'll encounter truths, other convictions, other faiths. Here you will be embraced as a member of a common family of seekers, all those past and present who have dedicated themselves to nurturing action and compassion, sympathetic to a common vision that no one person is an island unto themselves, but that we are all members on this world. We are all a part of this family and this thing called life.
Good morning. Just a little zippy good morning for you. So I'm Sarah Davidson. I'm the Director of Communications and Membership Engagement. And The first thing I have to do before I welcome our new members to the stage is to kind of talk about how beautiful this parachute is and to thank the environmental justice team and Chris Graham and our congregation and youth that wrote their pledges to the earth and taking care of it on the parachute. I invite you to look at it after service. It's lovely. Okay. So new members. As I call your name, please join the ministers on the stage. Paul O'Connor, Mary Ellen Murphy, Bruce Hubbard, and Rui Gong. And then I'm just going to read the names of those that can't join us today that have also signed the membership book recently. Christine Castellano, Elizabeth Thompson, and Stephen Serco. So, new members, I invite you to read the words that are printed on your insert that you're holding. As new members,
we accept responsibilities and freedoms associated with membership in a Unitarian Universalist congregation. We commit to support this religious unity with our time, gifts, and substance. Join members of Cedar Lane Unitarian Universalist Church in a common quest for religious and spiritual understanding.
Peggy Jackson, President-elect of the Board of Trustees. Will the congregation please rise in body or spirit and share the congregational affirmation printed in your order of service? We bid you welcome as you come with anticipation and joy. We hope that you will find here room to grow and flourish in mind, body, and spirit. We accept you in our community as companions in the spiritual journey. We pledge to rejoice with you in times of happiness, to grieve with you in times of sorrow, and to share with you all the blessings of our free faith.
Please give a warm welcome to our new members. As you cross this spiritual threshold into the deeper life of our congregation and journey together, let these words from our Unitarian forebearer Theodore Parker serve as our guidepost. Let us read them together. Be ours a religion which like sunshine goes everywhere, its temple all space, its shrine the good heart, its creed all truth, its ritual works of love, its profession of faith, divine living. Please remain risen as we sing together hymn number 163, For the Earth Forever Turning.
For
Let us center ourselves for a time, bringing our mind, body, and spirit into this space, made sacred by our presence and the presence of the Holy, in which we live, move, breathe, and have our being, the Holy that sustains life and all of creation. As we go deeper within and settle into that space of silence and honesty, courage and compassion, love and hope, may we lift up in our hearts the joys and sorrows that we carry with us, the joys and sorrows of our fellow companions in this, our community. May we also hold in our hearts the victims of yesterday's shooting at the Congregation Chabad near San Diego, California, and also the more than 250 lives taken last Sunday in a series of terror attacks in Sri Lanka. And let us take the time to acknowledge all the existing losses as the world feels the effects of global warming and climate change. People, animals, plants, and entire ecosystems die every year from the effects of global climate change. And so, as we acknowledge these losses, I invite you to respond, "We remember you." To all who have suffered losses to extreme heat waves, we remember you. To all who have suffered losses due to floods, hurricanes, mudslides, and other disasters, we remember you. To all who have suffered from hunger as crop patterns change, we remember you. To all who have suffered from drought as weather patterns change, we remember you. To all who have suffered from disease as the environment shifts, we remember you. To all those animals, beloved siblings of flesh and blood, breath and bone, whose lives have been lost as global climates change, we remember you. To all those plant spirits, precious siblings of the green world, whose lives have been lost as global climates change, we remember you. To all those species lost forever as global climate changes, we remember you. We remember you, and we commit ourselves to restoring balance. So may it be. Blessed be.
You now into a time of meditation and prayer. Spirit of life, we gather in this place of worship to celebrate creation in all its glory. We recall the times that we have been filled by the awe and wonder of life on earth, fully present to the abundant blessings. But we are limited beings with short sight and too often selfish or foolish motives. Shake us from our careless habits and guide us toward beloved community with all of living creation across time. Remove the barriers to our understanding of our role as stewards of the earth. Forgive us for the harm we have done and the harm we have not prevented. Help us to begin again with a new vision, where we dedicate our lives to a future where creation lives. As we embrace this silence together, I invite those who are grieving a loss or remembering the loss of a loved one to rise and be held by this community. May all feel held by a love that will not let us go. Amen. Please be seated.
It's not every day that we're encouraged to leave something behind. At our national parks, we're taught to leave no trace, to make sure that our national parks remain exactly as they are at the beginning and the end of our visit. And this is good advice. Now, here at Cedar Lane, we can engage in those same principles for our earth while also choosing to leave traces of our commitments along the way. One great way to find out what people care about is to follow their money. Something brought you here. What will you leave behind for future generations? Today's offering will now be gratefully received.
I was wrong about sitting on the edge of glory. The world is round, and I might as well be round too, uncertain where the edges of me end and the magnificence of creation begins. I was wrong about being worthy. This is not a gift. It is me. I am these rapids. I am these green leaves. I am these jagged rocks embedded with shells. I am these chirping birds and the fallen nests. I am the overgrown algae greedy for resources, trying to claim what does not. I am parasitic kudzu, out of my element, trying to claim what does not belong to me. I am this poison ivy masquerading as a natural beauty. I am a persistent ant navigating the vibrations under my feet. I am watching and being watched. I am listening and being heard. I am humbled.
I offer you peace, I offer you love, I offer you friendship. I see your beauty, I hear your need, I feel your feelings. My wisdom flows from the highest source. I salute that source in you. I offer you peace, I offer you love, I offer you friendship. I see your beauty, I hear your need, I feel your feelings. My wisdom flows from the highest source. I salute that source in you.
Thank you, choir, and welcome back, Jenny Lynn Moyer. It seems we've added a soprano named Vaughn, and we'll see if she develops into an alto. Yes, I heard the applause. 2 summers ago, I took a class from Wesley Theological Seminary called Spirituality in Nature, taught by Dr. Beth Norcross. And on the first day of class, about a dozen students gathered in a basement classroom with no windows. That just wasn't going to do for the Spirituality in Nature class. So we moved it outside. And once we got outside, Dr. Norcross clapped her hands together and said, "Now, I want you to meet your neighbors." And we thought that meant introducing ourselves to each other. But no. She turned and walked briskly toward a tall, thick tree with patchy bark and giant leaves. "Does anyone know this one's name?" she called out. We blankly stared back at her for a moment, and then a student hesitantly spoke up. "Is that a sycamore?" "Yes, excellent. Now let's meet more of your neighbors." She waved us on to follow her to the next tree. And we met many of the same trees and plants on the Wesley campus that you all have right here at Cedar Lane. An oak, a beech, a tulip poplar, an ash, a redbud, a dogwood, Japanese maples, fringe trees, black locusts. We made notes in our journals, and some of us became amateur artists trying to sketch the general shape of the leaves or other interesting aspects of the trees so we could make sure and remember them the next time we met. It was revolutionary for many of us to begin thinking of creation around us as our neighbors. Josh Whitten, founder of Make Soil, a movement and online platform, explains that over 10 years ago, he decided to make a compost bin. He found 2 slats that were left over from something and some chicken wire and made one, but not in an isolated backyard. He made one at his apartment complex in full view of all the apartment residents. And then he went around and he knocked on their doors. He said, "I'm just a single guy, I'm your neighbor, and I made this compost, but I don't have enough food scraps on my own. I heard this wild idea that we can turn our food waste into soil. I've never seen it, to be honest, but it's on the internet, so I was wondering if you'd like to contribute your food scraps." And many asked, "You want my garbage?" And he said, "You know what? Bring it. We'll figure it out, and let's see how far this can go." And within a few weeks, more than a dozen people were making contributions. "I took care of the rest," he said. Over the next few weeks, few months, all of the food waste, the coffee grounds, the scraps, even the small bits of pizza boxes, all turned into this beautiful black, rich soil. It was incredible. Whitten explains that making soil helps us complete a feedback loop in our brains, to actually see the outcome of our actions changing before our eyes. Our food waste turning into regenerative, healthy, nourishing soil that will, in turn, grow healthy, nourishing plants, which remove the carbon from our air and help us create oxygen to breathe, not to mention they're delicious in salads. At the current rate, though, of topsoil degradation, the UN says we have 60 years of farming left. We're demanding too much from our topsoil, but this does not need to be left to the farmers to deal with. You see, when people make soil together, the next idea that comes up is, what shall we plant? So millions of people growing their own food, making their own soil, creates a resilient food system. Making soil together is a beautiful way to build community. There aren't many things we come together to do that regenerate the planet. When we touch that living soil, it's full of microbes that communicate to our skin and our brain that the planet itself is alive. We go from feeling lonely to feeling immersed in a living system. And it seems that together is the best way for us to move forward and save the planet, together in community, responding to human needs and creation's needs. But we cannot all respond in the same way, with the same methods. We exist in a broken system, on a broken planet, and we have many limitations to deal with. A study on race and toxic waste in the United States resulted in a report that found that among a variety of indicators, the race was the best predictor of the location of hazardous waste facilities in the United States. 40% of the nation's commercial hazardous waste landfill capacity was in 3 predominantly African American and Hispanic communities. The largest landfill in the nation is found in Sumter County, Alabama, where 70% of its 17,000 residents are Black and 96% are poor. Professor James Cone, known as the founder of Black liberation theology, writes in his article, "Whose Earth Is It Anyway?" The fight for justice cannot be segregated, but must be integrated with the fight for all life in all its forms. Dr. Cone challenges us not to simply see creation holistically, but see the fight for justice holistically. We desperately need each other in the struggle for justice, peace, and the integrity of creation. Martin Luther King Jr.'s idea of the beloved community is a potent symbol for people struggling to build one world community where life in all its forms is respected. All life is interrelated, King said. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. There is an interrelated structure of reality. We echo that powerful message in our 7th principle, respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. Dr. Cone asks us challenging questions. Whose problems define the priorities of the environmental movement? Whose suffering claims its attention? Do environmentalists care about poor people? Now that humanity has reached the possibility of extinction, one would think that a critical assessment of how we got where we are would be the next step for sensitive and caring theologians of the earth. If we save the planet and have a society of inequality, we wouldn't have saved much. The earth is not a machine, it's an organism in which all things are a part of each other. And Dr. Cone urges us to deepen our conversations by linking the earth's crisis with the crisis in the human family. If it is important to save the habitats of birds and other species, then it is at least equally important to save Black lives in the ghettos and prisons of America. Representative John Lewis of Georgia says, working for clean air, clean water is just as important, if not more important, than anything I have ever worked on, including civil rights. American novelist Alice Walker writes, "It is not so much a question of whether the lion will one day lie down with the lamb, but whether human beings will ever be able to lie down with any creature or being at all." Creation is not only the gentle meadow near water where the poet Wendell Berry lies his weary head. Creation is not only the delicious backdrop of a Mary Oliver poem. Creation is a living organism that breathes and speaks and grows and dies and changes. But most of all, creation calls us to follow the living pulse, to respond to the cries of creation with life-giving, creative energy. In 2002, Albert Moser in Brazil realized that a plastic bottle could be reused, filled with water, and with a few drops of bleach, it became a light bulb. When you install this filled bottle into a tin roof where there are huts with tin roofs and there's no electricity, the sunlight refracts and lights up that bottle to the equivalence of a 40 to 60 watt incandescent bulb during the hours of daylight, but it uses no electricity and other than natural light. They call these light bulbs appropriately a liter of light. And at first, the liters of light would only be helpful during the daytime because the sunlight was there to activate them. But then the innovation began. Ilak Diaz from My Shelter Foundation took these liters of light into the Philippines and added a simple single circuit system with a 1 watt LED bulb inside the bottle. The single watt light, powered by the sun, inside this liter bottle could light a 15 square foot room with no cost and no carbon footprint. My Shelter Foundation installed 200,000 of these lights within the first year, giving light to so many who had lived without it. Alfredo Moser, the creator, says, "It is a divine light. God gave the sun to everyone, and light is for everyone." This is a renewable resource I actually learned about in my 4th grade class. The 4th grade class I was downstairs helping, not 4th grade years ago. They're learning about recognizing their own power. And we were all amazed by the impact of these liters of light could make on the community. It wasn't just a cool science project to try at home. They picked up very easily that these liters of light were a means of survival. Most children here at Cedar Lane have never had to know a life without electricity. This is a blessing and a privilege that we are tasked to hold with great responsibility. Joanna Macy, an environmental activist, author and scholar of Buddhism, systems theory, and deep ecology, identified in her work a spiral that maps out our journey into deeper connection with the earth. She describes this in 4 stages: coming from gratitude, honoring our pain for the world, seeing with new eyes, and going forth. I'll go into each of these. These 4 stages support one another, and they work best when they're experienced in that sequence. They help us experience firsthand that we are larger and stronger, deeper and more creative than we have been brought up to believe. The spiral is fractal in nature, she writes. The sequence can repeat itself in ever new ways, and even with a particular stage of the spiral. The spiral can be discerned over the span of a lifetime or a project, and it can also happen in a day or several times a day. We come back to it again and again as a source of strength and fresh perspective. The spiral begins with gratitude, because that quiets the frantic mind and brings us back to the source, stimulating our empathy and our confidence. It helps us to be more fully present and opens up psychic space for acknowledging the pain we carry for our world. In owning and honoring our pain and daring to experience it, we learn the true meaning of compassion, to suffer with. We begin to know the immensity of our heart mind. What had isolated us in private anguish now opens outward and delivers us into the wider reaches of our interexistence. Experiencing the reality of our interexistence helps us see with new eyes. We can sense how intimately and inextricably we are related to all that is. We can taste our own power to change We can feel the texture of the living connections with past and future generations, with our sibling species. Then, ever again, we go forth into the actions that call each of us according to our own situations and gifts and limitations. With others, whenever and wherever possible, we set a target, lay a plan, step out. We don't wait for a blueprint or a fail-proof scheme, for each step will be our teacher, bringing new perspectives and opportunities. Even when we don't succeed in a given venture, we can be grateful for the chance we took and the lessons we learned. And the spiral begins again. There are hard things to face in our world today if we want to be of use. Gratitude, when it is real, offers no blinders. On the contrary, in the face of devastation and tragedy, it can ground us. Especially when we're scared, gratitude can hold us steady for the work that needs to be done. I close today with the classic words of Alice Walker. I think it pisses God off if you walk by the color purple in a field somewhere and don't notice it. People think pleasing God is all God cares about, but any fool living in the world can see it always trying to please us back. Looking outside today, with the sun breaking through these clouds, I am grateful for all the colors. I see you, God. Thank you. I see you, Mother Earth. Thank you. And I see you, creation. Thank you. May creation live through us. Blessed be, may it be so. Amen. Please turn in your hymnals or read up on the screen hymn number 298, Wake Now My Senses. We will sing verses 1, 3, and 5. Please remain standing and find a hand to connect with. May the birds sing you an anthem. May the sun greet you with its shine. May the breeze deliver you a feather. And may the earth reveal the divine. Blessed be. Go in peace. And now, Henry, Please be seated for our postlude.
Thank you, Christin. Good morning, everyone. No, I am not the postlude. But I'm incredibly excited to present to you this artist whom we will host next Sunday afternoon at 4 o'clock. The 2017 National Endowment of the Arts National Heritage Fellow, Mr. Phil Wiggins, who is the only living harmonica player of this ilk that received this award. Phil used to play with John Cephas until Mr. Cephas passed away, and then he broadened his musical relationships with a number of people, including the Louisiana-born blues guitarist, singer Eleanor Ellis. And so the two of them will be our guests next Sunday afternoon for an incredible afternoon of blues. But there are some bonuses to this. Barry Burgee is a member of our Cedar Lane congregation. Barry is the retired director of the National Endowment of the Arts Folk and Traditional Arts, and Barry and photographer Tom Peaks wrote this book, Folk Masters, A Portrait of America. It includes 100 portraits and stories of people like Phil Wiggins, the fellows. And Barry will be on hand at 3 o'clock in the chapel to give a talk on this book, and he'll have some books for signing, should you wish to purchase one. Then, at 4 o'clock, the concert will occur here. Then, right after the concert, we'll have Annabelle's Mobile Kitchen out at the curb, serving some tremendous soul food. She was here last Saturday, May 5, a year ago, when we did a spirit experience on celebrating Hispanic heritage. This time, it's a little bit more slanted towards soul food. So I hope you'll come. I hope you'll send out the email that will e-blast announcing the concert to all your friends so that we can finally, once this year, fill this place with butts in the seats.
Amen.
So please come, 4 o'clock or 3 o'clock, whatever you choose. Here's a tease of Phil and his work.
Thank you.